In MCC 35, the Cerulean Canes finished 5th, 6th, 7th, and 27th to become the 7th best Ace Race team ever. This knocked Purple 15 down to 11th on the all-time leaderboard, causing Ace Race to join Survival Games as the only MCC games to feature 10 unique events in their top 10 performances. 2 other games come close, featuring 9 unique events in their top 10, and most games have at least 7. Sands of Time has 5. This is the least diverse top 10 of any game on the active roster, barring Parkour Warrior and Bingo But Fast, which have only been played 7 and 2 times respectively. Scoring changes can cause leaderboards to become unreflective of the true best performances. For example, here's the Grid Runners leaderboard. If every run was rescored under current scoring, this one is revealed to be the actual best performance. Other game leaderboards have been even more severely affected by scoring changes. The top 6 Build Mart scores are exclusively from MCCs 5 and 6. If we look at the total coins earned from each time Build Mart was played, it's easy to see why. I'll give you one guess as to when both the game time and build completion rewards were reduced. With this in mind, let's circle back to Sands of Time. Like Build Mart, its leaderboard is dominated by a few particular events. However, if we look at the total coins earned, we see an erratic pattern with no areas of abnormally high or low scoring. This does not mean that Sands of Time has no distinct eras, as the dungeon rooms were heavily updated between seasons 1 and 2, as well as sand and/or coin quantities being clearly reduced after MCCs 7 and 20. Yet we still see much higher variance in scores than any other game. The reason for this is simple. Sands of Time uses a different randomly generated seed each event. Small fluctuations in sand quantities and changes in difficulty of finding vaults and vault keys affect every team, causing much larger fluctuations in terms of the total score. So how can we find out which runs are better or worse than others if they were played on seeds of different difficulties? How can we even determine the difficulty of a seed? We can't. Comparing every seed to each other would take tons of time and likely be very subjective. Some sort of formula is needed to normalize scores against each other for comparison. But there is no formula, so I decided to make my own. Now, unlike the other games, there is no consistent scoring in which performing an action, such as killing an opponent or finishing a course, gives a set amount of coins. Therefore, I can't just read transcripts and assign coins like I could if I was rescoring another game. My solution was to compare each Sands of Time run to each other run on the same seed, which normalizes scores for both dungeon difficulty and player base experience. Here's the exact formula. The coins banked by a team are divided by the total coins collected among all 10 teams that event, then multiplied by 100. A score of 10, for example, means that the team banked 10% of all coins collected that game. If an event saw no players die or get locked in, 10 would be the average score among teams that event, but as of MCC 35, there has never been a lossless Sands of Time. As such, a score of 10 is slightly above average. So why am I dividing by total coins collected rather than banked anyway? Why not divide by total coins banked to give a convenient average of 10? The problem with doing that is that if a team suffers massive losses, their banked coins will be extremely low and make the seed appear to be much harder than it actually is after calculations. This wouldn't be a big issue if we had large sample sizes, but each seed is only played once and by just 10 teams. Therefore, coins lost varies wildly, and one event in particular was such a big outlier that it forced me to use coins collected. MCC 17 was the second of 3 straight events featuring similar total Sands of Time scores, but its leaderboard looks a bit odd compared to those of the other 2 events. Whereas MCCs 16 and 18 feature all 10 teams putting up respectable scores with somewhat standard score distributions, 17 has a chasm between a record-breaking top 6 and a subpar bottom 4. Only 8 teams have ever banked more than 2,000 unmultiplied coins, and a record 3 of those runs came in MCC 17. Additionally, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th place teams all set records for coins scored by their respective placements. How then does a record-setting dungeon yield similar scores to these other 2? Well, those weren't the only records set that day. We've already seen the total coins banked for each event, but the total coins collected paint a crazy picture. A record 20,204 coins were collected this Sands of Time, nearly 3,000 more than the second highest scoring event. Less than 14,000 of these coins were banked, making for a record low banking rate of 68% and a total of 6,514 coins lost when no other event has even reached 3,000. Let's return to the team leaderboard and see who exactly lost these coins. 5 of these teams, obviously all in the top 6 in terms of coins banked, lost 0 coins. The Pink Parrots, despite losing over 700 coins, get to hang out with the other successful teams up here. Our main culprits are down here. All 4 of these teams lost over 1,000 coins. In the 24 other events featuring Sands of Time, a grand total of 3 teams have accomplished this feat. Additionally, Cyan's 1,557 coins lost would have been a record had the entire blue team not fallen victim to the sand timer a few minutes earlier. Returning these lost coins to their owners makes for a much nicer looking leaderboard with more consistent scoring from top to bottom. It also increases the number of 2,000 coin teams up to 5, and there very well could have been 7 had red and blue been able to take advantage of the lost sand. Purple, the winners of this game, dropped to 3rd in coins collected, making their 3rd place all-time run look much less impressive. Needless to say, no teams from MCC 17 will appear on our new top 10 leaderboard. There's just one last issue I had to work out before applying our formula. Some teams had inherent disadvantages that greatly hampered their ability to keep up with the competition. I'm not talking about the Simmers or other quote-unquote for fun teams, but rather teams facing such unusual circumstances that I chose to disqualify them from comparisons. 4 such teams have been disqualified. Purple and Pink 10 for being viewer teams, a concept that is now relegated to non-canon events, and Orange 8 and Orange 15 for having only 3 players. The formula has been altered accordingly when measuring these events. Now that that's out of the way, let's do a few test runs. We'll begin with Lime 31, who are about 300 coins behind Red for the 2nd dodgebolt position after 7 games. No other teams are realistically within reach, so all they have to do is beat a Red team with 2 newcomers and a sophomore. The run begins fine, with Michael Sand keeping, Jack running the blue path, Hannah doing the red puzzle, and Sapnap in an unmarked path. Some time is wasted early on due to poor rusty key management, with Sapnap having to come back to the main room to drop off some of the keys Michael gave him, and Han and Jack needing to come back to pick them up. Jack's return to the blue path is where things really start going wrong, as he encounters difficult lava parkour that he believes the blue vault is behind. So, he tries it.
All good. I have 4 sand.
We have 80 seconds on the clock. I am filling it in.
Lava.
I have 2 sand.
He didn't have many coins on him or any sand whatsoever, but the loss of the blue key was very consequential. Not only does it lock the team out of the blue vault, which is worth about 500 coins on a 3x multiplier, but he loses his purpose as the blue runner. So his teammates give him a new one, to retrieve the gold key. Jack would attempt and fail this twice, ultimately getting locked in because the team felt it wasn't worth spending sand to rescue him again. If the team had focused on continuing to explore tunnels during the final few minutes instead of grabbing the gold key, they may have been able to catch Red or at least put up a better fight. Instead, they remained 3rd overall with a 10th place Sands of Time that earned them a subpar score of 7.38. So that's what a bad Sands of Time run looks like. Now let's check out a good one. Red 22 are 2nd in a tight 6-way battle for the 2 dodgebolt spots heading into Game 7. Fortunately for them, their team is very well equipped for a late Sands of Time, as Sam and George are both excellent runners, and Dream is arguably the best Sands of Time player ever. The team goes for a vault rush strategy, with Sam as the blue runner, George as the red runner, Dream as the gold runner, and Puffy as sandkeeper. There was a small hiccup of about 4 minutes in with Sam dying to a creeper, but he was able to recover his sand and coins. Despite the death, the run is extremely successful, with 3 vaults unlocked before the 8-minute mark. All that remains is the gold vault. Dream already knows its location, and he is always willing to do the gold key parkour. If the gold key is found and he is successful, his team will be the first team ever to open all 4 vaults.
I think I found the gold key. There's a key here.
Oh, nice.
There's a key
Dream
for
found
sure?
the gold vault.
Yeah, there's a key down here, I'm pretty sure.
And there it is. When George announces he found it, Dream makes a beeline for the red vault path. This is not a risk he needs to take with nearly a third of his team's coins on him, but he does. He makes it to the other side and grabs the key. All he needs to do is make it back. And he does. The toughest hurdle has been jumped, but a new problem presents itself: the timer. By the time Dream exits the red tunnel, nearly 13 minutes have elapsed during the run. The team is running low on sand, and acquiring more this late into a run is very difficult. He knows there is a good chance he'll get locked in if he goes for it, but he's determined to try. He banks his coins at the Sphinx, a practice rarely seen nowadays thanks to the 20% tax for doing so, and returns to the gold path. He makes it to the gold vault, but loses precious time on the way there thanks to zombies and confusion at an intersection. He picks up a few sand on the way back, but it won't help. The timer is too low to make it back in time. His run ends with the central room in sight. If Dream made his decision in the central room faster, or if his teammates found even one more sand, he could have exited the dungeon with the contents of the gold vault. The run would have been widely regarded as one of the best of all time. But even though he didn't, Red 22 put together a very good run that edged out Aqua for first place and helped secure them a position in Dodgebolt. This performance earns a strong score of 13.43, as well as the distinction of being the only run to lead an event in both coins banked and coins lost. Those were just 2 of 250 canon runs. Here are the rest. Well, actually, 240 of them. We don't have the time to cover every Sands of Time run ever in detail, so they will just have to be appreciated as dots on a graph. As for the other 10 runs, it's time to get acquainted with them. Number 10 goes to Green 21 with a score of 13.89. This run is somewhat of an oddity, being one of 4 canon events in which the winning team didn't open the most vaults, and the only one in which none of the teams with more vaults suffered any losses. To make up for their mediocre vault numbers, they gathered enough coins outside of the vaults that they would have still placed second even if they had opened none. Dream added yet another great run to his resume, leading the event in vaultless coins with 463. Even including coins from vaults, he places 6th among players in coins banked. But this wasn't just a carry from a Sands of Time great. Among the players that outscored him were Tommy and Sylvie, who each unlocked a vault in their excellent Vault Rush performance. Unfortunately for Green, they were unable to take advantage of this run to jump into Dodgebolt. Sands of Time was Dream's first real strong performance this MCC, and it came in Game 7 when his team had fallen nearly 4,000 coins behind second place. It did help to turn things around though, with Green ultimately placing 4th after a good performance in a parkour tag finale. In 9th place, with a score of 14.17, is Orange 24, the only second place team to make the list. Their strategy of choice was also the Vault Rush, a term I've thrown around a few times now without much explanation. So here it is. The Vault Rush is a strategy in which the 3 runners each take one of the 3 vault tunnels to explore. It was popularized by Dream shortly after the Season 2 Sands of Time update, with the benefits not just being reliably unlocking the red and blue vaults, but also the large amount of sand that spawns outside the vaults. Then, in MCC 21, dungeon generation was changed, causing the Vault Rush to become even stronger. Vault paths were guaranteed to be of long length, and the green and gold keys almost always appeared in vault paths. MCC 24's gold path was especially notable, being the largest path in the dungeon and containing both the green and gold keys. Thanks to this, the Vault Rush was primed to dominate this dungeon, and so the Orange Ocelots did. Almost. Late into the run, the team was wrapping up an amazing Vault Rush, with the gold vault being found and the other 3 vaults unlocked. But then, H-Bomb had the opportunity to make it a perfect one. He had found the gold key. He deliberated for a bit, deciding whether or not it was worth the risk this late into the run. The gold key parkour was one of the things changed in MCC 21, becoming more difficult but gaining an option to skip half the jumps in exchange for 4 sand. He would love to do it though. It would be very fitting for H-Bomb 94, the Sands of Time guy, to be a part of the first ever 4 vault run. But he ultimately decides not to. His team is in a dodgeball position, and he doesn't want to lose it over excessive greed in the final game. As exciting as the alternative would have been, he made the right call here, and Orange secured their dodgeball spot as a result. In 8th place is a team that most people would rank even higher than the spot they earned here. I'm talking about Blue 31, who earned a score of 14.51 with what some might call the best run of all time. Perfect even. But what is perfection in Sands of Time? Is it collecting and banking every single coin in the dungeon? By the definition of the word, yes, it is, but I don't think that's possible even with a team of 4 strong players who know the layout of the entire dungeon and have optimized the routes accordingly. So let's shrink our definition of perfect down to something that can feasibly be accomplished. We can't measure this based on a number of coins or sand collected, as those values can vary between dungeons, But there are two consistent metrics: vaults opened, in which the maximum is always 4, and coins lost, in which the minimum is always 0. The only canon run to accomplish both of these is this one. Not only that, but Blue 31 was one of 8 teams to bank 2,000 coins and one of just 3 to spend 16 minutes in the dungeon. Then why are they, with the only quote-unquote perfect run, in 8th on this leaderboard rather than, say, 1st? The dungeon was too easy. I don't mean to dismiss a 4 vault run as easy. There have only been 4 such runs in all of MCC, including Dream's Gold Vault Lock-In and Anfrost's non-canon Simmer team. Every single one of these required great skill and coordination to accomplish a feat so difficult. Of the 4, Blue 31's task may have been the hardest, with thorough exploration of the blue and gold paths needed to ensure that both the vaults and the vault keys located in said paths were found. But although unlocking the specific combination of blue, green, and gold vaults was accomplished by only blue, all 10 teams unlocked at least 2 vaults for the first time ever. Additionally, every team collected at least 1,000 coins for the 6th time ever. That's what it means to have an easy seed. But to their credit, Blue 31 is the only team from any of those 6 events to make it onto this list. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is when Sands of Time is played. It has been featured in the Decision Dome in 28 canon events. In 6 of those events, it was played on 1.5 or 2 times multiplier. In another 3, it was skipped. In all 18 of the remaining events, it was played in the final 2 games. Some teams will be in a dodgeball position, some will be within striking range of one, and some will have fallen out of contention entirely. A team will often adjust its playstyle based on which category it falls into. Orange 24, for example, had H-Bomb find the gold key parkour late, and he decided against trying it because his team was in a dodgeball position, so he wanted to play it safe. Blue 31, however, was in 9th prior to playing Sands of Time. They had nothing to lose. So when Cubfan found the gold key parkour with all the other vaults opened, the exact same position H-Bomb found himself in back in MCC 24, H encouraged him to go for it. Thanks to Cub's heroics, Blue 31 jumped all the way up to 5th place in the final standings. Despite the struggles they had faced in the first 7 games and the fact that they still finished 3,000 coins out of Dodgebolt, Blue was one of the happiest teams when all was said and done thanks to what they had just accomplished. Coming in at number 7 is MCC 24's first place team, the Cyan Coyotes. They earned a score of 14.55 with a very similar run to Orange's. Like Orange, they used a vault rush strategy to gather the sand outside of the gold vault and unlock the 3 others. They beat Orange by just 40 coins and even placed the same amount of sand in the timer. The biggest difference between the two teams came down to experience. Orange was composed of veterans who had played Sands of Time a total of 50 times and were among the favorites to win the game. Cyan, on the other hand, was expected to perform poorly. Aside from Pearl, the team was extremely inexperienced. Hannah was a newcomer, and Aimsy's only Sands of Time experience came nearly a year prior in MCC Rising. JoJo had a bit more experience, with 4 MCCs total, but 2 of those were from non-canon events the previous year, and her most recent run was this. It was her first time leading a team, and it was going very well through 6 games. Her yellow yaks, or golden gals as they were commonly referred to, were within 500 coins of a dodgeball position despite being widely predicted to place in the bottom 5. They looked at the leaderboard, considered the strengths and weaknesses of the teams above them, and decided to vote for Sands of Time. JoJo's running was good, finding the green key and plenty of sand, but her teammates died twice in the same mob pit, let loose a Ravager that blocked the blue path, and all got locked in despite 2 of them being in the timer room as the 10-second countdown began. Only 137 of the Golden Gals' already poor 571 coins collected were banked, knocking them far out of dodgeball position and putting JoJo's first individual in jeopardy. It would ultimately be taken from her in the final game. That will never happen again. At least not on JoJo's watch. She, Hannah, and Aimsy watched plenty of Sands of Time VODs prior to the event, and all of that preparation paid off. Hannah led the team in coins banked with 492, which tied her with Purple for 3rd all-time in coins banked by a newcomer, only behind Sapnap and Puns. JoJo began a streak of 4 straight Sands of Time wins, Aimsy turned from a Sands of Time hater into one of its biggest fans, and Pearl finally won her first Sands after victory was tragically ripped away from her team twice earlier in the season. Despite their struggles earlier in the event, Cyan 24 is one of the most beloved teams among not just fans, but Cyan themselves. Winning late Sands of Time just has that effect on people. It can completely redeem an otherwise mediocre event. It happened for Cyan 24, it happened for Blue 31, and it will continue to happen whenever Sands of Time is played Game 8. But that's the last of these redemption stories we'll see today. The top 6 teams were all very much in dodgeball contention, and they stepped up to the occasion. 6th place goes to the Purple Pandas of MCC 35, who barely breached the 15-point threshold with a score of 15.01. They enter a Game 7 Sands of Time in 5th place, roughly 1,500 coins out of Dodgebolt. As the best Sands of Time team on paper, they need to make up as much ground as possible now, as the finale game of either to get to the other side or Meltdown will be a good one for the current top 2 teams. Before the game begins, Purple establishes that Pete will run the gold path, Sneak red, and Tapple blue. This plan immediately falls apart when Pete begins the game by entering the blue path and Tapple heads down the red path. Car helps the team get back on track when she spots the red path and calls Tapple back, but Pete continues on, not realizing he's in the blue path until his chat informs him. He's still skeptical though, and he only leaves when Kara once again comes to the rescue and finds the gold path. With Pete and Tapple finally down their proper paths, things should be smooth sailing from here on out. But Tapple now faces the same struggle Pete did. Despite being told he is on the blue path, he can't confirm that he actually is. He explores for a bit and then leaves, convinced that his teammates are wrong. But they aren't. How do they know? There's a single strip of blue in the first room. It's very high up and blends in with the blue dungeon as the mandatory lava parkour directs your attention downward. The next blue marking can't be found until here, just a few steps beyond the point where Tapple turned back due to his lack of belief. One thing players struggle with in Sands of Time is moving on. They make a mistake and then it's all they can think about for the rest of the run. They'll retry the gold key parkour or attempt to retrieve their coins from a mob pit or even lava, but the right play is often just to move on and find a new tunnel to explore. Tapple, despite not making any major mistakes, hasn't been having a good run. With the blue key in his possession and having learned from Kara how she knew his path was the blue path, it would not be shocking whatsoever to see him go right back in. But he doesn't. He instead goes down an unmarked path where he can immediately begin finding sand and coins. And even though he's still vocalizing his confusion over the blue path, he sticks to what he's doing and stays productive. If you close your eyes and just listen to Sands of Time gameplay, you might notice a trend. Generally, the better performing teams will have the most boring comms. Most of the talking will be about the sand or the timer, but when something goes poorly, the call becomes more active. Players may begin to panic, and the team leader begins frantically issuing commands to try mitigating any damage. Besides Sandkeeper comms, Purple's VC has been primarily used by Tapple to express his confusion over the blue path. Pete and Sneak haven't been heard from as much. So how have they been doing? Oh, just placing top 2 in terms of coins banked, despite Pete not even opening a vault. Even Tapple managed to place 16th after all his troubles. Thanks to this, Purple was able to pull within 600 coins of Cerulean and set the stage for one of the most epic races for Dodgebolt in MCC history. But that's a story for another day. Red 28, who take 5th place with a score of 15.11, have a familiar sounding story. In 5th place and 1,500 coins from Dodgebolt, they are in the same position as Purple 35, except this time it's Game 8. They won't have a chance to make up the last bit of coins if they come up short. Emerald are out of reach as a 3,000 coin difference is too much to overcome unless they have a catastrophic run. The second position is within reach, but landing it is a tall order. Red will have to beat Purple by 500 coins, Teal by 1,300, and Ginger by 1,500. But there's one thing in their favor: they are a very strong Sands of Time team. All 4 players have plenty of experience performing their respective roles. Purple and Ginger, on the other hand, have 1 and 2 players respectively whose only experience is a single non-canon event. Overtaking these teams is very doable. But there's one issue. The best Sands of Time team on paper is Teal. Red are going to have to play out of their minds or hope disaster befalls the Teal turkeys. They only have agency over one of those things, so they get to work. The runners get off to a strong start, quickly finding their respective vault paths. Then, just 3 minutes in, Gem finds the gold key parkour. The gold key parkour has undergone a few reworks over MCC's lifetime, and some versions are easier than others. In Season 1, the gold key was found behind a lava parkour with a random obstacle between 2 3x3 platforms. The random obstacle could vary significantly in difficulty, so completing it in MCC 8, for example, would be easier than in MCC 12. But obtaining the gold key in the early days of Sands of Time was made even more difficult because multiple of these parkour rooms could be generated in a dungeon. You could look at the rewards beforehand, like anyone should before attempting lava parkour, but that presents a new problem. Vault keys didn't have pedestals back then. They just laid flat on the ground, and the gold key was the perfect color to blend in with the coin piles around it. Here's the MCC 8 parkour again. Notice how the key is barely visible and could still be mistaken for coins if you weren't looking closely enough. Now here's the MCC 12 parkour. The gold key isn't even visible here. To get close enough to see it, you would have to enter the difficult section in the middle. This would be addressed during Sands of Time's rework between seasons, which introduced vault key podiums to ensure they wouldn't be missed, as well as unique rooms for each key. The gold key's room would now always be the downward chains. This change, along with the introduction of vault paths, greatly increased the rate at which the gold vault was opened. But another issue began to present itself thanks to the new changes. The Nox crew like to keep the total scoring of each game at roughly 10,000 unmultiplied coins. This is very difficult for Sands of Time, which is one of just 2 games in which teams don't deny others coins when obtaining them for themselves. We've already seen how erratic the scoring is, but from MCCs 16 to 20 it began to stabilize, at around 14,000. That was far too high for Nox crew's liking, so they decided to make the dungeon a bit more difficult, and one of the areas affected was the gold key parkour. This is what it looked like for the rest of Season 2. It's much more difficult than the chain parkour, but players have the option to pay 4 sand to skip half of it. But to my knowledge, nobody has ever paid the sand. It's simply not worth it. The parkour is still very difficult, and sand is scarcer now than it ever has been. Thanks to the increase in difficulty and perceived uselessness of the sand sacrifice, players have largely begun to ignore the gold key. JoJo is her team's strongest player and the gold runner, so Gem notifies her immediately when she finds the parkour. But she, like everyone else not named Dream, does not fancy trying the parkour. If there ever was a time to go for it, it would be now, as JoJo does not have many coins on her this early in the game. But she decides not to, and that's reasonable. It's just so difficult, especially in a situation as high pressure as this one. So she continues her exploration of the gold path, eventually finding the gold vault. Then she gives the gold keys some more serious contemplation. It's very tempting now that she knows the location of the gold vault, but it's just so risky now that she has so many coins on her. Dying would dash all hopes of making dodgeball, whereas simply continuing a great 3 vault run might be enough to get them there. Additionally, Gem would have to lead JoJo to the gold key, meaning that 2 people would be collecting 0 sand and coins for a decent amount of time. I don't think she considered that last bit, but JoJo ultimately made the decision I would have at that point in time. That is, to ignore the gold key. There's just no need to risk your life this late into a run this good.
I have 2 sand.
Oh my god, Gem, what did I just say? The timer was displaying 30 seconds when he exited that tunnel, but that doesn't actually mean there's 30 seconds remaining. It can be any number above 20 and you don't know exactly what unless you've been tracking the timer sounds. It takes 12 seconds to cross the central room and about 2 to collect the coins in the sand sacrifice, then you have to go all the way back, another 12 seconds. That's 26 seconds assuming optimal movement. More likely than not, you're going to get yourself locked in.
Wait, is that enough?
As we gather our bearings, we can see that Teal's run solidly secures them second place. But those 117 extra coins that Gem escaped with by a fraction of a second were enough to jump Ginger and give Ranboo a fitting 3rd place team to end the season on. That massive risk wasn't even necessary as there was a sand sacrifice in a tunnel much closer to the portal, and if Ranboo had been more clear with its comms, then Gem may have gone for that instead. Based on my observations of MCC 33, sand sacrifices found in tunnels give about twice as many coins as the ones in spawn, so Red would have had an even higher score if she did that one. They still would have missed Dodgebolt though, so even if you could give that a redo, why not just go it in style? At number 4 with a score of 15.66 is that run. The one that sits high atop the coins banked leaderboard with over 2,700 when no other team has cracked 2,300. The run that holds the multiplied Sands of Time record by a good margin despite not being played on the highest multiplier. The run that made Green 7 the only canon team to reach 25,000 coins. This is the first Season 1 run we're seeing today, so it's time to investigate the differences in dungeon generation beyond the gold key parkour. Unfortunately, no map of the MCC 7 dungeon exists, and I'm not interested in making one myself, so I'll show MCC 11's map instead. The first difference you'll notice is the timer room. It only has 7 branches as opposed to the modern 11. However, the old timer room has an underground section that contains 2 parkour sections and a red key puzzle, effectively boosting it up to 10. If you compare the contents of each specific branch to those of a modern dungeon, they're actually quite similar, with the modern maps having a piston puzzle as the missing 11th branch. The contents of the tunnels were also overhauled, with many rooms being removed after Season 1, such as this, and this. Even more rooms were added in return, many of which featuring newly introduced elements such as breakable cracked blocks, mob statues, and lever-activated iron bars. And of course, there were no vault path indicators back then, making unlocking vaults much more difficult as you either had to get lucky with the path you went down or leave the keys with the sandkeeper and return for them after finding a vault. Speaking of vaults, those of you with a keen eye may have noticed something peculiar about this map. If you trace the blue and red vaults back to their origin, you can see that they are in the same tunnel. This is not the first time this has happened. MCC 7, in which this very run takes place, is responsible for this image. If this dungeon was played nowadays, or even later in Season 1, it would make for a very feast or famine scoring, as both the blue and red keys are found in spawn, so teams would almost certainly unlock both vaults if they located this area. Back then, however, players didn't know that the red key was found beneath the sand timer, so the red vault was not unlocked this event despite there being 4 blue vault openings. One of the 4 teams to unlock the blue vault was, of course, green. They were also one of 6 teams to unlock the green vault, and so they in line became the first teams to ever unlock multiple vaults in a Sands of Time run. This milestone is impressive, and I give Green my congratulations for achieving it, but 2 vaults is kinda mediocre by today's standards. Only one other run we've seen on our new leaderboard thus far unlocks so few. Additionally, the total number of vaults unlocked this event was just 10, yet the teams combined to bank the most coins ever and collect the second most coins ever behind MCC 17 to knock Green's run from high atop the coins banked leaderboard down to 4th on this one. That's just another difference about the Season 1 dungeons coming into play. There were a lot more coins and sand in the tunnels than there are nowadays. This was also the first event to feature coins as a reward for breaking spawners, but the Nox crew didn't seem to have compensated by lowering coins found elsewhere, possibly because the coin totals in the previous event were still quite low. Green set many records with this run. They have the most coins collected, coins banked, and time spent in the dungeon of any run ever. They are also one of 2 teams to ever collect 2,000 coins from outside the vaults, and the only team to ever bank as much. But like Blue 31, their opposition's high scores indicate that the dungeon was too easy to place them any higher. Green 7 had to contend with teams like Purple, who sit second on the all-time coins banked leaderboard, and Aqua, who banked over 1,700 coins exclusively using the Sphinx, and are 5th all-time in coins collected. But in a way, this makes the run even more impressive. They reached 4th on this leaderboard because they put up a quantity of coins so high that not even competition like this could hold them back. One thing I noticed about this graph is that the top 10 runs seemingly have distinct tiers. 10th through 6th place are just the higher end of normal high placing runs, and 5th and 4th are a bit above that, but the top 3 runs blow them all out of the water. 3rd place has a score of 16.88, a good 1.2 higher than Green 7's 4th place run. This is the work of Emerald 19. For the second time today, we are seeing Snows of Time, a winter-themed reskin of Sands of Time. The dungeon is primarily a dark blue color, with some light greyish blue elements and white accents. Additionally, the sand has been retextured to snow, which is also white. This can cause problems in which a player mistakes a snow block for part of a wall, or vice versa. The reason I'm addressing this now instead of earlier when I covered Red 28 is because the snow has since been given a blue tint, making it much easier to identify. But for MCC 19, the teams are stuck having to guess whether white block is sand or part of the scenery. While I do fully support the change, I think the issue was a bit overblown by the players. Like, sure, the walls in this room do look like they contain snow, but do you really think you'd just be handed 9 sand like that? Now, to be fair, players commonly turn off their brains while playing Sands of Time, and digging this wall is far from the dumbest thing I've seen a player do. In fact, I would recommend digging if you're unsure whether a block is snow or a wall, since it only takes a second to check. It's much worse to miss sand because you didn't take the time to do so. There are a few specific rooms that have very egregious issues, however. Here's one of them. Dream has to contend with multiple spawners in close proximity to one another, so the priority here is to torch or destroy them, then deal with the mobs, then grab any coins or sand. He does just that, and with the spawner broken and mobs killed, he tries to mine a piece of snow. Although a surprise attack from the zombie thwarted his efforts, he was able to identify in that split second that that block was breaking far too slowly to be sand. And if we look at this room in a non-winter dungeon, we can see that it is indeed part of the scenery. Dream then begins to head back as the sandkeeper is out of sand, and he runs past this block right here. He may have thought that this block, like the one he just tried to mine, is also not sand. Or he may have just not seen it since it blends in with the scenery. Either way, as we see from the normal dungeon, this actually is sand. At the end of the day, it's only 1 sand, so missing it didn't matter all that much. But who knows how much sand the teams missed in total thanks to the winter textures and the effect it had on their scores. The teams did bank significantly less coins this event than other events of this era, although their time spent in the dungeon is similar to the previous event. Digging a little deeper reveals another potential culprit for this difference: vaults. In MCC 18, the majority of teams unlocked 3 vaults and combined for a total of 23. In MCC 19, however, just 13 total vaults were opened. Looking at who unlocked which vaults makes the reason for Emerald's massive lead over the other teams in this event crystal clear. Not only were they the only team to unlock 3 vaults, but one of those vaults was the gold vault, which yields about double the coins of any of the other vaults. And the craziest part is that it should have been even better. The first path Dream goes down is an unmarked path. This is often a dumb idea nowadays, as vault paths are guaranteed to be very long and almost always contain the green and gold keys, leaving unmarked paths to often be embarrassingly short and rarely of any relevance to the vaults. In early Season 2 though, vault keys often spawned in unmarked paths, and Ranbu, who is also in an unmarked path, has found the gold key. He calls it out as soon as he notices it, but Dream tells him not to do it, presumably deeming it safer for himself to try the parkour. Having already heard a premature call for sand by Slimecicle, he decides to stop exploring the tunnel and come back to be the gold runner. Ranbu does the parkour anyway and is successful, but by then it's too late. Dream has already come back to the center, and with just one branch of that path left unexplored, nobody's gonna go back in. I sure hope there wasn't anything valuable up there. All Dream had to do to obtain the green key was enter that branch and take a left turn. If Ranbu had found the gold key just 10 seconds later, or not called out that he found it, or maybe even if Slimecicle didn't request sand, Dream would have found the green key. Instead, due simply to unfortunate timing, the mythical 4-vault run will have to come another day. The second best canon run, with a score of 17.27, is by the Orange Ocelots all the way back in MCC 6. This is probably the most surprising entry on this list, and I'll get this out of the way right now. If I were to rank every run based on my personal opinion rather than stats, I wouldn't place this run so high. The reason my formula does is because it calculates dungeon difficulty based on the combined performances of all 10 teams, which means weak or inexperienced teams can make a dungeon appear much more difficult than it actually was. And this event in particular was perfect for producing a run that scores abnormally high by my formula. It typically takes at least 3 events for players to get properly acclimated to a game. This is most commonly seen nowadays in Ace Race whenever a new map is introduced. The first run is just players feeling out the course and sometimes trying alternative routes if they notice any. The second playthrough sees improvement across the board, but a small number of players, typically top placers, will have learned a lot from the first run and they try new skips to gain an extra advantage. It's only the third time around when the player base at large has an idea of what's optimal, having seen the routes taken by the innovators in the previous event. A similar pattern can be seen in Sands of Time, with the total scores of the first 3 games showing massive improvement between events. MCC 6 was the second time Sands of Time was played, putting it in that special position where the stronger players will improve more than the rest of the field. But this shouldn't produce particularly imbalanced scores. The kind of players that learn quickly and innovate are generally the strongest players who rarely appear on teams together. Season 1, however, was a different time. A time in which Scott would watch Pizza Hut and Vicstar dominate the event together 4 times in a row, then put them together for a 5th time with Tommy in it to boot. After reaching Dodgebolt for the 4th time in 5 events, the duo of Pete and Vic was gone for good. So surely Pete's next team won't be as broken as his previous 5, right? If Orange 6 were to play together again today, after MCC 35, their weighted average would be 9,116. For reference, teams these days usually have a score in the low 8,000s, and no team has ever had a score as high as 8,900 since the use of weighted averages in team building. But they aren't playing today, they're playing in MCC 6, at which point their average is over 10,000. With an average like that, they are capable of winning any game, and one of their best games on paper is Sands of Time. Orange is one of just 3 teams in which all 4 players have previously played Sands of Time, but that doesn't tell half the story. Pete and Martin were the top 2 players in terms of coins banked last event by a wide margin, and Jimmy collected the 4th most coins despite dying and spending nearly 4 minutes locked in his tomb. H-Bomb is decent, I guess, coming 20th in coins banked last event, although to be fair, his team did not spend all that long in the dungeon. Surprisingly, H-Bomb was not selected as the Sandkeeper after his mediocre run last event, with that honor going to Jimmy instead. H-Bomb immediately showcases why he should be running by diligently lighting up each spawner he comes across, but there are a few things he does, or rather does not do, that differentiates the H-Bomb of MCC 6 from the H-Bomb of today. First of all, he doesn't break the spawners. That is perfectly reasonable though, as spawners do not drop coins in MCC 6. More importantly, he's committing Sands of Time's greatest sin. He's not offhanding torches. Nowadays, offhanding torches is very heavily associated with H-Bomb, with him drilling this specific piece of advice into the heads of everyone he meets. But he wasn't the first person to ever do it. That, I believe, is Shovel, who put torches in her offhand midway through the first ever Sands of Time in MCC 5. A few more people would do the same in MCC 6, then finally in MCC 7 players began offhanding torches for the full length of the game. But H-Bomb wasn't one of them. He was very late to the party, finally offhanding torches for the first time in MCC 16. Offhanding torches for a full game is just one of many things that have yet to be done at this point though, and H-Bomb is about to do one of those things. In the previous event, only one vault was opened. Technoblade, who opened it, nearly tripled his coin total, boosting him up to first place in coins collected for the event. Unfortunately for him, there were only 20 seconds on the timer and his teammates had no sand, so he got locked in and lost everything. He probably could have made it out if he didn't get distracted, but poor communication led to him thinking he had much more time than he did and ultimately caused his demise. H-Bomb is not going to have such issues. When he finds the blue vault early into the run, he immediately calls it out to his teammates and tells them to keep an eye out for the blue key. When Pete tells him it's at spawn, he wastes no time in retrieving it and returning to the vault. He opens it and collects its contents, but then faces a dilemma. He's carrying more coins than any player had last event, and he wants to ensure their safety. He mentions trying to play more carefully, but I don't think he believes that's reliable. He wants to use the Sphinx, but Pete tells him to hold off on it. So then...
I'll become the bank. I'll become the bank. I'll become the bank.
Well, I found some coins, but I don't know how.
Jimmy, you switch with me. Toss me the sand and then you take over going that way.
Yes, you heard that correctly. He made the call to rotate Sandkeepers, a strategy seen nowadays as innovative, as theoretically better than the standard, but not used as it's thought to be too risky. A strategy that most MCC fans or even participants likely think was attempted only once in a disastrous run by Green24. But H-Bomb and Jimmy successfully pulled it off in MCC 6. I knew next to nothing about Orange 6's run before making this video, and the same probably goes for you before watching it. But now it's one of my all-time favorites. Sure, it's a broken team beating up on weaker ones in the early days of the game, but they innovated, and I appreciate them greatly for it. I hope you do too. Before we look at the number 1 run, there are a few honorable mentions I'd like to share. We've only been covering canon events up to this point, as there is a notable skill difference in non-canon events. However, 4 non-canon runs exceeded a score of 15, so I feel like they deserve a shout out. The first is Blue Pride 23, who placed 8th on a combined leaderboard of both canon and non-canon events with a score of 15.48. This is the only non-canon 4 vault run, led by Antfrost becoming the only player to ever unlock 3 vaults in one run. Despite the strong vault play though, Blue struggled with sand collection, only managing to stay in the dungeon for a mediocre 11 minutes and 20 seconds. Mediocre in a canon event, at least. With Pride 23's weaker roster, 11:20 is good for the 3rd longest run in the event. The overall shorter runs can make for lower coin counts, which helped to boost the shortest run we've seen today up here to 8th. Another team that got to take advantage of this was Orange Pride 23, who are 5th with a score of 16.94. Orange is the only team to ever beat a 4 vault run, and they did so by simply being an all-around good team. They boasted 3 good runners, which is a rarity in lower powered rosters like this one, and they opened 3 vaults including the gold vault and collected enough sand to remain in the dungeon for nearly 14 minutes, a mark typically reached only by 1 or 2 teams in each canon event. Red All-Stars, who placed 4th with a score of 17.01, take advantage of a different situation. Instead of having abnormally weak competition, they are an abnormally strong team. All 4 of their players are good runners, so Dream hatches a plan. He will sandkeep until the gold key is found, at which point he will go do the parkour and become the gold runner, and one of his teammates will become the sandkeeper. The idea is that not only will he get to the parkour faster, but he'll have less coins on him to lose if he fails. Dream ends up sandkeeping for the majority of the run, but he puts on quite the show. He quickly gathers all the sand and flicks all the levers in the timer room, then begins to enter tunnels when all the timer room challenges are complete. Eventually, after about 10 minutes of the best sandkeeping MCC has ever seen, he goes back to being the best runner in the event, grabbing the key and unlocking the vault in under 3 minutes to finish off the run. In 2nd place on the combined leaderboard, with the highest score we've seen thus far at 18.02, is Purple from MCC Underdogs. Purple, like the Pride 23 teams discussed earlier, benefited heavily from weaker competition, with the 8,143 coins collected only surpassing MCC's 5 and Rising 2. But they weren't supposed to be the ones benefiting. Blue and Red were the clear-cut favorites in Sands of Time, with each team having 2 proven good runners. Purple, meanwhile, had 2 players who had never played Sands of Time before, 1 player who ran once and struggled mightily, and 1 player who tested back in Season 1 but never played in a modern dungeon. But the craziest thing happened. Blue, Red, and Orange, who were expected to place 4th, all lost the red key in lava. That's all 3 of Purple's strongest competitors rendered unable to unlock the red vault, substantially decreasing the impact they could have on the total coins collected. Additionally, 11 sand in total were lost alongside those red keys, another 3 were required to revive the dead players, and each of those teams suffered at least 1 additional death during their runs. On Purple's end, Firebreathman showed that he didn't need any recent experience to do well. He continued his dominant performance across the event by banking almost as many coins as the entire second place team did, but despite his dominance he had 1 hiccup. Early in the run, he missed a jump over lava that a player of his caliber should not be missing. The 82 coins he lost would have pushed his team's score up above 19, making it the best run ever. The 6 sand he lost on top of that could have even allowed them to surpass 20, but it just wasn't meant to be. And honestly, I'm glad. It means that the best run ever is from a canon event, and that just feels right to me. So here it is, the most dominant run in the history of Sands of Time. Its score of 18.96 is nearly a full point greater than Underdog's Purple, and almost 1.7 above the nearest canon run. And it is so very deserved. Unlike some other teams we've seen today, this team didn't have the advantage of having weaker or inexperienced competition. They played in one of the most balanced events of all time, and every single player in this event had already played Sands of Time at least twice. Yet they still blew every other team out of the water. The best Sands of Time run ever belongs to the Cyan Coyotes of MCC 29. Knowing what we know now, it would be easy to say Cyan was the best Sands of Time team this MCC, but that wasn't the case prior to the event. Aqua was the favorite to win the game by virtue of having a good leader in H-Bomb, as well as having no question marks surrounding any of their runners, which most other teams had. The concerns about Cyan were simple. 2 of their players most commonly played as Sandkeeper. G-Nelly had been Sandkeeper in every canon event she'd played, only running in MCC underdogs with decent results, although not the kind you'd win a canon event with. Scott, being the most experienced player in MCC, had obviously done some running in his career, but his most recent time was back in MCC 19, which was 15 months in the past. If we dive a little deeper, we can see that his MCC 19 run was actually quite good, placing 5th in the event according to the power rankings. Rust could still be an issue given how long ago that was, but I would doubt it would be all that impactful. Scott has still been playing MCC in regular SMP Minecraft, so he's not going to be mechanically rusty. He's also very calm and collected, which helps him avoid some of the biggest issues new runners face, being panicking and indecisiveness. So on second thought, maybe Cyan is the best Sands of Time team in the event. They do resemble Red 28, who we saw the strength of earlier. But then if they so closely resemble Red 28, who scored just above 15, how can they nearly reach 19? If we compare the 2 teams, we see that Scott and Gem had roughly equally good runs, with the same applicable for G and Scar's sandkeeping performances. If we look at the strength of the opposition, the edge goes to Red 28, who took advantage of the Simmers collecting less coins than they did in MCC 5. That leaves just one last thing to investigate, the dungeon itself. The first thing you should notice about this map is the size of the vault paths. They are very big, which could in theory make it harder to find the vaults, but runners nowadays don't have much trouble as long as they don't make any large errors. What's more impactful is that longer vault paths make for less generation in the unmarked paths, which are all quite small here. Players typically want to prioritize vault paths, but communication in the early game is often poor, meaning they will have to sometimes explore an unmarked path to avoid wasting lots of time in the hub room. This is where the small path problem comes in, as they will be explored quickly and the runner will have nowhere left to go but right back to the hub room. So once again, the runner will have to find a path before they can begin collecting sand. Another place where runners spend time not collecting sand is the red key puzzle. This puzzle is harder than normal in my opinion. It's typically best to begin with the 6-letter word as it often has the least possible answers. In this puzzle, the 6-letter word is rabbit. Wait, no, it's not. It's fabric, but you thought it was rabbit. So did your chat, and now you'll have to wait a good 20 seconds or so for the rabbit spam to end so they can give you the actual answer. Players could have saved some time here if they realized that this was the exact same puzzle as the one in MCC 24, but no one did. Even the 4 players doing the puzzle for the second time didn't feel a hint of deja vu. Okay, so the puzzle was difficult and the unmarked paths are short. These have happened before though. There must be something else. What makes this dungeon special? Can we even see it on this map? Yes, we can. The culprit here is the red path, and it is the most brutal path that I have ever seen in Sands of Time. Let's begin with the most obvious aspect. That's a lot of spawners. It's important to note that not all spawners are equal. They can spawn different mobs, and their location also matters a good deal. These, for instance, are challenging sections with multiple spawners that spawn difficult mobs to handle like blazes and pillagers. However, they are optional. They aren't the reason why this path caused players so much trouble. Additionally, spawners that are alone in the middle of the hallway or behind a cracked wall, such as these ones, are easy to deal with. If we look in the other paths, we can see that they are mostly composed of these types of spawners. But there's also this. Located deep into the blue path is a segment composed of 2 zombie spawners, a skeleton spawner, and a pillager spawner. See that glass covering half of it? That means it's an unexplored area. Players don't even want to explore this area. What this map doesn't show you is that these 4 spawners are in different rooms, each separated by a 1 block wide hallway but close enough to spawn mobs while you're dealing with a spawner in an adjacent room. It's a grueling challenge that even the best of players try to avoid whenever possible. Fortunately for the blue runners, they can, and so they did. The red runners don't have that luxury. This segment is right in the middle of the red path. Now this segment alone isn't the hardest thing ever, even though it's more time consuming than players like. But it gets worse. Much worse. This segment and those around it combine for 9 spawners, almost in sequence, that all must be addressed. You have to fight mobs for a few minutes, collecting minimal coins and 0 sand, just to progress further. And when you finally do, you're immediately met with 3 straight rusty doors. Since you've already spent 2 keys to get here and probably used a third, you likely won't have enough remaining to get through all 3 doors, so now you have to go all the way back to the center to get more keys from your sandkeeper, then come back down the tunnel, all the while continuing to not collect sand. Then finally, beyond the spawner gauntlet, beyond the rusty doors, is the green key. That, plus the red vault a bit further in, make for 2 vaults that can only be unlocked by venturing down this horrible abomination of a path. I think I've said enough about how hard the red path is at this point, so let's watch someone explore it. Antfrost will be the red runner for the pink parrots, and he's already off to a good start, spotting the red puzzle before the game begins. He beelines it to the puzzle room, and then he does the 4-letter word first and gets punished for it.
Wait.
He recovers quickly though, and thanks to good communication from Tubbo is able to enter the red path with less than 2 minutes elapsed since the game's beginning. Things continued to go well for him when he encounters his first intersection, as he picks the correct path and quickly neutralizes the first 3 spawners. He then grabs his first piece of sand and unlocks his second rusty door, which is unfortunately not the way to the vault. He does find 3 additional sand down this branch though, and unlocks his third rusty door a minute later to get back on track. He enters the 4 spawner segment and lights up a few spawners, but he doesn't like what he sees. He turns around to look for another branch and drops off his sand while he's at it. Coming back, he still can't find anything, somehow missing 2 branches that fortunately don't lead anywhere, and resigns himself to venturing back down the spawner gauntlet. He collects his 5th sand of the day and first in 3 minutes, then quickly progresses beyond the spawners where he faces a 4th rusty door, then a 5th, and he runs out of rusty keys as the 6th is revealed. Now he has to go all the way back to the center again for rusty keys, costing him over 2 minutes of time. When he finally unlocks the 6th door, his team is out of sand and the timer is running low. He's forced to immediately turn around after grabbing the green key, and the one last piece of sand almost comes in clutch, but a missed jump at the timer costs just enough time to lock him in. Antfrost is a great Sands of Time player. He has good mechanics, good game knowledge, and a tendency to lead his team to strong multi-vault runs even if they don't spend lots of time in the dungeon. But he couldn't even use the green key, let alone unlock the red vault even further down the path. Despite his excellent handling of the spawners, he was only able to collect 6 sand across his entire run. He needed his 2 fellow runners to gather enough sand to sustain him, which they just couldn't do. And this is the problem that plagued the teams of MCC 29. Remember what I said earlier about most teams having at least 1 questionable runner? They couldn't send a good runner down the red path with 2 good runners providing sand. Nobody else collected the green key. Except for Cyan. Ranbu, thanks to Jojo and Scott's excellent running, was able to break through and collect both the green key and the red vault, the latter by the skin of his teeth as he reached the timer just 2 seconds from getting locked in. Cyan became the first team ever to unlock 3 vaults in an event where no other team even unlocked 2, and their 1,712 coins gave them a record-setting lead over second place Aqua's 969. Even without the green and red vaults, Cyan would have had a nearly 500 coin lead over second that would land them in 3rd place on the rescored leaderboard. But thanks to a dungeon with the perfect difficulty that allowed them and only them to unlock 2 extra vaults, they sit dominantly in first. If you're on the final team to exit the dungeon, you get to see the scores immediately. Scott, the MCC organizer himself, who has played more Sands of Time than any other player, said he had never seen a lead like this upon exiting the dungeon. But nobody else really seemed to notice the significance of what just happened. H-Bomb didn't mention it during his VOD review, All Things MCC's highlights video showed Ranboo's timer clutch but made no mention of the scores, and there was little fanfare on Reddit besides scaling the scores up to Sands of Time's typical multiplier of 3. I have seen a few people over the past year show their appreciation for this run, but the consensus among the community is that Green 30 and Blue 31, the 2 canon successful 4 vault runs, are the best runs ever. I don't agree with the consensus. From the moment I first saw the scores, I knew something special had happened. Shortly afterward, I came up with the idea of scaling all Sands of Time scores for cross-event comparison, and as I expected, this run landed in first. I wanted to give recognition to this run, as nobody else really has. It's not all that easy to discover, as it doesn't stand out in the typical ranking of coins banked, where it sits in 22nd. I felt that as time went on, it could end up being largely forgotten by the community, like some of these runs may already have been. Having begun watching the event in MCC 20 and really becoming invested around MCC 24, I knew very little about Green 21, Emerald 19, and Orange 6, and working on this video really changed that. And again, like Cyan 29, these runs don't stand out on the typical leaderboard. But here, they do. When you look at this graph, it's hard not to gaze toward this colorful area up here. The 12 most recent times Sands of Time has been played account for just under 50% of all runs, but contain 8 of the top 10. The other 2 are a small island, separated from the mainland by a sea 10 events in width. How does such a peculiar pattern form? The 2 early runs came from Pete and H-Bomb sharing a team, but the rest began right as MCC teams started to become much more balanced. They do kinda line up with the MCC 21 update, but I don't think that's the cause. I think the answer can be found back here. This graph shows the amount of coins banked and collected in each event, but I'm more interested in the difference between the 2. So I decided to reformat it, and I noticed something interesting. The 8 events with the greatest losses all occurred within this span of 10. And if we pick this up and put it over here, it clicks. This span of high losses aligns perfectly with the top 10 drought. Now you may be like, wait, wasn't this accounted for when you created the formula? Yes, it was, but let's dive deeper. More total losses means it's more likely that the top team suffered big losses. When they do, they all but throw away their chance at a top run. This happened 5 times across these 10 events. In the 12 events since, it's only happened once. So what caused this sudden shift? Unfortunately, I can't answer this with a statistic, but I believe I figured it out nonetheless. Sands of Time made its Season 2 debut in MCC 15, and the next day, something caused the winds of change to begin to blow. A tradition that has lasted for over 2.5 years. H-Bomb's Sands of Time review. He spent 4 hours that morning watching various players play the game and critiquing their performances, and his fellow players took note. A few events later, players had gotten comfortable running the new dungeons and eliminated a lot of bad habits from their gameplay. They ushered in a new era of high quality running that we've gotten to experience for 2 years and will continue to for many more. But will we ever see anything like this again? I don't really know. Cyan 29 got the perfect combination of a roster unusually weak at Sands of Time with a dungeon just difficult enough to exacerbate the skill difference. Unless conditions like this happen again, there will need to be some sort of innovation, as the play-it-safe vault rush strategy just won't cut it. Right now though, players seem to have stopped trying to improve at Sands of Time. Most players are good at their respective roles, and now rather than improving further, they're waiting for the game to get revamped again. People just don't seem interested in innovating right now. So I will. Keep an eye out for my next video. I'd like to thank the MCC community for creating the wonderful resources that made this video possible. They will be linked in the description below, as will my spreadsheet containing every rescored run. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, I'd appreciate it if you like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.
Like, the first time I played this map with like a team of testers, we got all 4 vaults and we got like 2.5k unmultiplied.
Nice.
So
Nice.
this is a very doable dungeon.